The most watched show in the entire history of the DIY network went quiet, and the man who built it spent that silence swinging a hammer somewhere the cameras never followed. His name is Mark Bowe, and for over a decade he turned a dying piece of Appalachian heritage into one of cable television's most unlikely success stories. But the decision he made once the spotlight dimmed is the one that defines everything that came before it. By the end of this video, you'll understand why a coal miner from Glasgow, West Virginia, was always building towards something that had nothing to do with a television deal. There are two versions of the Mark Bowe story. The first one is the one the network liked. A charming West Virginia craftsman leads a crew of hillbillies across Appalachia, saving 200-year-old barns one timber at a time. The cameras follow them everywhere. The audience falls in love. The show runs 19 seasons. Roll credits. The second version is messier, more honest, and starts a long time before any of that. Mark Bowe grew up in Glasgow, West Virginia, a small town in Kanawha County where the population barely cleared a few hundred people, and where you learned early that the way out was work. His father held multiple jobs at once. Bowe was beside him for most of it, watching a man carry himself with exactly the kind of quiet pride that doesn't get celebrated much but gets everything done. That lesson lodged somewhere deep. After high school, Bowe enrolled at West Virginia University. Tuition had to come from somewhere, and so he went underground. He worked in the coal mines to fund his first year of college, then went back to the mines to pay for the next year, then again for the year after that. This was not a colorful detail for a television bio. It was the only option. He continued that cycle: mine, study, repeat, until he held a bachelor's degree in business administration from WVU's College of Business and Economics. Then he kept going and earned a master's degree in safety management from the same university. 2 degrees, funded entirely by underground labor. The man who would one day build luxury vacation cabins from reclaimed pioneer wood was, for years, working hundreds of feet below the surface to afford the chance to do something else. After graduating, Bowe didn't go straight into the trades. He worked as a mine safety technician, then as an HR director, then as an insurance agent. He was adaptable, ambitious, and by his own admission, often scared. He had found ways to build a stable life. But stability and purpose are two different things, and somewhere in his late 20s, the gap between them got harder to ignore. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. The moment that started all of it was not a plan. In 1995, Mark Bowe helped a friend tear down an old barn. No cameras, no audience, just 2 guys taking apart a structure that had been standing since before their grandparents were born. And something about the process, the weight of the timber, the craftsmanship locked inside wood that had survived 2 centuries without anyone paying attention to it, stayed with him in a way nothing had before. He didn't quit his other work immediately. That's not how he operated. He spent the next few years learning the craft on weekends while continuing his regular work during the week. He drove through the hills of West Virginia and Kentucky, knocking on doors, asking farmers if they knew of old structures that were falling in. He developed an eye for timber that most people drove past without noticing. By 1996, he had founded Antique Cabins and Barns, a small operation built on the idea that the hand-hewn logs inside dying pioneer structures were worth saving, and that the people who built them 200 years ago deserved better than a bulldozer. Then came Kentucky. In 1996, Bowe was scouting in Fleming County, Kentucky, when someone directed him toward a local who knew old log cabins. The man he found was a ponytailed older guy named Johnny Jett. Bowe introduced himself. Jett told him he was thinking about getting out of the log cabin business. Johnny Jett had entered that business for the most human of reasons. His brother had died of a heart attack in the middle of a cabin build, and Jett had finished it himself to cope with the grief. He brought a friend named Sherman Thompson into the work. Together they had been dismantling and selling cabins for years. And just like that, the 3 of them were in each other's lives. By 1998, Jett and Thompson were working directly for Bowe's company, forming the core of what would eventually become the crew of Barnwood builders. None of them knew that yet. They were just working. Here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. For the better part of a decade, Mark Bowe ran his reclamation business without any attention from the outside world. He was building a reputation in the region, and the work was growing. But Antique Cabins and Barns was a niche trade operation, the kind of thing that doesn't generate headlines or fan mail. Then, sometime around 2004 and 2005, Bowe was working in his office in Lewisburg, West Virginia, when a man walked in looking for a cabin for a property in upstate New York. The man toured Bowe's boneyard, the lot where reclaimed logs and salvaged timbers were stored and cataloged before being repurposed. He came back impressed. He then told Bowe who he actually was, a documentary filmmaker who had worked with Ken Burns. That visitor filmed a 20-minute documentary pilot about Bowe and his operation in 2005. The project was shelved for years. The network landscape wasn't ready for it, or the timing wasn't right, or some combination of both. Bowe went back to work. He didn't wait. By the time the pilot resurfaced and a production deal came together, it was 2013. Barnwood Builders premiered on the DIY network on November 1st of that year. Producers had approached Bowe with the standard cable television playbook: cast drama, manufactured conflict, the usual scaffolding that holds together most reality shows. He reportedly refused. The show would follow real work done by real craftsmen, or he wasn't interested. DIY Network agreed to take it as is. Within 2 years, Barnwood Builders was pulling in more than 3.6 million total viewers a month. By season 7, more than 4.8 million viewers watched, the show's highest-rated season at that point. It became the single most watched program in the entire history of the DIY network. A coal miner from a small town in West Virginia had, without planning any of it, become one of cable television's most unlikely breakout personalities. Most people who know this story stop here. But the real story starts right now. Television success has a way of making people forget the business underneath it. For Mark Bowe, the show was never the destination. He was clear about that in his own words, describing it in one interview as the income stream that allowed him to explore new ideas without the financial risk of another collapse. He had been through enough pivots, from coal miner to safety technician to insurance agent to television host, to know that any single platform is temporary. You use it while it's working, you build something else with your hands while it is. So while Barnwood Builders ran season after season, Bowe was expanding in every direction. In 2016, he grew antique cabins and barns into a broader lifestyle brand called Barnwood Living, headquartered at 574 Main Street in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. The storefront carried reclaimed wood furniture, rustic decor, handcrafted merchandise, and products that channeled the spirit of the show into things people could buy and take home. He partnered with AHF Products to develop his own signature hardwood floor collection, Barnwood Living by Bruce, a line of solid and engineered hardwood floors inspired by the worn character of the old timber his crew had spent decades working with. He also served a term on the Lewisburg City Council, built a memorial pavilion in White Sulphur Springs following the devastating 2016 West Virginia floods, dedicated to the 23 people who lost their lives in that disaster. Led team-building construction projects at West Virginia University. Every year, hosted a pajama and book drive for local families. And through all of it, he kept his storefront running, his crew working, and his name attached to the kind of craftsmanship that couldn't be replicated by someone chasing an algorithm. By the time the cameras had been rolling for over a decade, Barnwood Living's White Sulphur Springs location was drawing more than 500 out-of-state visitors every single month. People were driving into town specifically because of the show. They were walking through the store, buying things, asking questions, and then getting back in their cars and leaving. One phone call, one conversation. That's all it took to change the direction of everything. The calculation Mark Bowe made was simple, once you see it clearly. 500 people a month were traveling from out of state specifically to visit his store in White Sulphur Springs. They had watched years of his show. They trusted the name. They wanted to experience something connected to it. And then they left, because there was nowhere for them to stay that belonged to that world. So he built it. Over a year and a half, while the show was still in production, while the cameras were still rolling, while the network contracts were still active, Bowe and his entire crew shifted a significant portion of their energy toward building Barnwood Village. 3 vacation cabins constructed from the same reclaimed pioneer-era materials that had made the show what it was, located in the heart of White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. The 3 cabins are named the Spa City Cottage, the Big Draft Timber Frame, and the Dry Creek Cabin. Each one runs roughly 400 square feet and is built using hand-hewn logs, reclaimed wood elements, and the same construction methods the crew had been using on camera for years. Inside, the cabins are fitted with luxury bedding, designer finishes, smart TVs, and the Barnwood Living by Bruce hardwood floors from Bowe's own product line. The combination of pioneer-era structure and contemporary comfort was deliberate, the same tension that made the show compelling, made physical and bookable on Airbnb. In September 2024, Barnwood Village officially opened. By that point, season 19 of the show had wrapped, and no new season had been announced. Bowe's own words about the project were direct. "We get at least 500 people from out of state that come to the store every month. Now these visitors can stay in a cabin constructed just for them." And then this. "Barnwood Village comes from a place of great pride in our team for what we have accomplished in White Sulphur Springs. This project originated from a desire to offer guests an exceptional experience, not just a place to stay, not a backup plan, a next chapter." And if you think that was surprising, stay with me because this next part is why the whole story matters. When Barnwood Builders went quiet after season 19, the fan response was immediate. Forum threads filled up with worried posts. People asked whether the show had been canceled. Comment sections on social media turned into something between a petition and a eulogy. Some of the more pessimistic coverage declared the show finished. The official Barnwood Builders page posted nothing definitive, only a cryptic note. "We promise we'll be back soon, hint, hint." Magnolia Network, the channel formerly known as DIY Network that had been home to the show since the rebrand in 2022, issued no cancellation statement, no official renewal either. The result was the kind of silence that fans find harder to deal with than a clean ending. But look at the sequence of events, and a different picture emerges. Bowe had spent the better part of a decade methodically building a business infrastructure that did not depend on any single network or production cycle. The retail store was running. The product lines were active. The floor collection was on shelves. The vacation cabins were open and booked. He was appearing at public events throughout 2025, talking about the show and its values, engaging with the community he had built over 12 years of television. This was not a man who had been blindsided by silence. This was a man who had been preparing for it since long before it arrived. The show had changed over the years in ways that viewers noticed. What began as a raw, almost ethnographic look at working craftsmen had evolved into something more polished, more Magnolia Network than DIY Network, if that distinction means anything to the people who watched both eras. The channel itself had shifted its identity significantly after Chip and Joanna Gaines took over creative direction, leaning toward home renovation and cooking content in ways that left shows like Barnwood Builders feeling slightly out of place in the lineup. Whether that tension contributed to the hiatus is not confirmed. What is confirmed is that Bowe kept working throughout. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. The question people kept asking online was whether Barnwood Builders was over. They were asking the wrong question. Barnwood Builders, the television show, was always one part of something larger. The show gave Mark Bowe a platform and an audience. He used both of them to build things that would exist whether the cameras came back or not. That's the pattern, if you trace it far enough back. A coal miner who worked underground to build a path upward. A weekend craftsman who spent years learning before going full-time. A television personality who refused to let producers turn his crew into characters. The man from Glasgow, West Virginia has been in the adaptation business his entire life. The show was the most visible chapter of that story. It was not the final one. Barnwood Village is open. Guests walk into those cabins and sleep under the same hand-hewn timbers that the crew has been pulling from dying structures for nearly 3 decades. People who followed the show for years can now book a stay in something built specifically for them, by the same hands they watched on screen. That's not television. That's something more permanent. And there are more than 500 of them coming through White Sulphur Springs every single month, before the cabins even existed. The audience was already there. Bowe just finally gave them somewhere to stay. The reviews on booking platforms tell a version of the story the cameras never captured. Guests mention the craftsmanship, the cleanliness, the attention to detail in every finish. Several mention that Mark Bowe himself showed up, not as a host, not as a personality, but as the person who built the place, checking in, talking to people, doing exactly what he has always done. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What he did instead is the part nobody talks about. There is a single quote from a 2020 interview that explains Mark Bowe better than any season of the show managed to. He was asked about his career, about the pivots and the constant reinvention, and his answer was this: "It's a mentality of adapt and overcome. As West Virginians, we've either had to figure that out or we've taken the hillbilly highway somewhere else." He also admitted, without any particular drama, that he was often scared. That detail matters. The version of Mark Bowe that exists on television is confident, calm, funny, and completely at ease with a chainsaw. But the version he describes in his own words is someone who has been scared most of his professional life and kept going anyway. Someone who started underground and worked his way to the surface, literally and otherwise, one decision at a time. He was the first in his family to attend college. He funded it himself. He built 2 businesses from scratch, sold one, transformed the other. He refused to let a network turn his crew into performing versions of themselves. He built a memorial to flood victims in his own town. He launched a hospitality venture while running a television show, not after it ended. The show ran 19 seasons. It drew nearly 5 million viewers at its peak. It was the most watched program in the history of its network. And when it paused, or ended, depending on what comes next, the man at the center of it had already ensured that the pause didn't matter as much as it would have for almost anyone else. Barnwood Builders, the show may return. The official page suggests it will. Bowe's public appearances throughout 2025 have done nothing to suggest the crew has disbanded or the story is finished. But even if the cameras never rolled again, the work would continue. It always has. Mark Bowe started in a coal mine and built something that will outlast every network deal he ever signed. The show gave him a platform. The platform gave him an audience. The audience gave him the foundation to build something permanent in the town he chose to call home. Something that exists in the physical world, built by hand, from wood that survived 2 centuries before anyone thought to save it. Barnwood Village is open. The crew is intact. The brand is growing. And a man who has spent 30 years adapting and overcoming is, by all available evidence, still doing exactly that. Here's the question worth sitting with. Most people in Mark Bowe's position, at the peak of a 19-season cable hit, would have waited for the network to decide what came next. They would have let someone else hold the pen on that chapter. He didn't. He picked up a hammer instead. Would you have made the same call? Or would the security of staying on television have been too hard to walk away from? Drop your answer in the comments, because the people who followed this show for 12 years deserve to have that conversation.